Hey everyone, this is Mikko. When I start a painting, there are usually three main ways how I start a painting. One is just blocking in volume, and that means big silhouettes and what the main shape of my point of interest is going to be, or just exploring different colors and trying to find out what is interesting in the mess of colors that I make and finding the idea that way. And one is line art. Line art I use sometimes in a very rough way, like here in the beginning. None of these lines are supposed to be in the final piece. It's just blocking in with a silhouette shape. For a piece like this would be impossible because there are important detail within the main silhouette, which is this building. Therefore, I need more information on planning the piece. How big are the objects that I want to get inside this house? And I need to have them in a scale that is big enough so that people can read them easily. And obviously when the idea comes to me, it's just an idea without a frame, and by frame I mean the canvas size where there are edges, and the edges of 2D canvas present certain type of limitations. If I had just my imagination to go by, I would want to have all of the surroundings in the same image, and I would like to have a small submarine for this piece as well. But when I'm blocking in this piece, I realized that it would just make the whole piece such a mess of a thing to look at, because the camera would have to be so zoomed out that you wouldn't be able to see any of the small details that are actually important for the story of this piece. And that story defines how close the camera is when it comes to the edges of the piece and how close the camera is to show enough detail within that house. So I scrapped the submarine. I think that would be a cool house on its own. Maybe somebody could live in a submarine. That would be a fun design to do. But that's not the point of this illustration, so I had to let it go, sadly. But maybe we'll see it in a later painting someday. By the way, this is also part of my Art is My Real Home challenge. I'm gonna put a card in the description and into this video so that you can take part if you want. You still have all of this month when I'm posting this video to take part in this challenge so that I can share your work on Instagram as well. When I have enough lines, I'm blocking in some basic shapes with colors. At this phase, I'm still not sure what the main method of making this illustration is. I haven't committed to using the actual line art, but as I'm making these more geometric shapes within this piece, I realized that I'm going to need a lot more information on where these objects are, how much space they are taking, because just rendering each piece is going to take so much time that I need more planning, because the number of objects in this painting is so much bigger than in my usual illustrations. For this planning, I'm adding line art. And here I want to quickly address this trick that I'm doing to this carpet. Because I'm using the isometric grid, using the isometric grid can sometimes lead to very stiff looking, blocky look to your illustrations, because you're aligning every line according to that isometric grid. If you just tilt the object, like for example for this carpet, I'm making the shape of the carpet in kind of flat view from top down, and then I'm tilting it with transform tools just slightly, and then when I go to the transform tools for the second time, the control points have been reset to align with the edges of the canvas, so it has already been tilted, and then I just adjust those control points to the isometric grid corners, and that ensures me that I am adding those objects in the correct perspective. However, I'm not aligning them to the perspective help lines themselves, so they are slightly tilted off. Also this bed, it kind of looks like it's going along the isometric grid of this piece. That is just a help guide for me to make this illustration, but I also tilted that shape slightly before I transformed it onto the floor of this house. And that way I can have the bed be perfectly aligned with the perspective of the room. However, it's not following exactly the lines so that they are perfectly angled and ordered, because that just looks like less like a lived-in space and more like a architectural plan for a house. And that's not how normal people live. Normal people have their furniture kind of tilted slightly off all the time. And if you're going for that kind of video gamey look, then it's completely fine. But that can look very cold, and it's hard to make it look this cozy. And I think the coziness of this room is the main thing that I'm going for. I want to make this like an inviting, nice room. And I think the story here is that the dog or pet or fox, I'm not exactly sure what this creature on the bed is waiting for the owner to return. And it's a nice place with all kinds of toys for the dog. And it's not a prison, but it feels more lonely when the owner is not there. At this phase, I have already noticed that I grew the creature, the dog fox thing, into a massive, massive scale. It's so huge. But I thought that this is kind of hilarious. And why would a person have a pet that is this massive in this small space? So I thought that this would be definitely something that I would do, because when I had a dog, I had a Newfoundland dog, and those are just like massive black bears. That's how I think a pet should be like. So I would like to have a dog this size, or a fox, whatever. It's a very fat fox. Out of all the elements, probably the entrance to this house is the hardest to draw, because I want it to fit into this canvas, and at the same time I need to have enough room for it so it doesn't look like I had just squished it in. And yet the amount of detail, it can't be too interesting at the corner of the image for me to pull attention to. So I'm going to use very dark values in the painting phase to make it less important. But it's going to have some lights inside, and I want to show that mechanism of how that works. So you go into this airlock, and then you open the other door, and this protects the entire house that way. Because it needs to fill up with water if you're just leaving outside for a swim, and if you are not docking your submarine to this door. But if you come to this house with a submarine, you can just open the airlock and you don't need to fill it with water then. See, I thought about this dumb stuff, even though like actually nobody is asking for it, but I just want to have some inner logic to it. And when I'm adding these small details to the house, I'm thinking about what kind of a person would live in this space. So obviously they are living underwater, but I thought that this would be more interesting if it's not like the main point of this living space. This person is a writer, so that's why they have so many books, and there's a typewriter on the desk. And when I'm adding these details, they kind of inform me what other details need to be added. Like for example, if I have a typewriter on the desk and pencil and papers, then I'm going to need a chair as well. At this point, I haven't still realized that, but I will add the chair later. All of the electricity and things that are lit up and how they work, I added this power generator to the corner of the bed. This part to me is the most fun thing about this whole painting process, because when you are figuring out all these concepts of how a person would live in this space and how they spend their time there and why this space even exists, you get to imagine a different world and find that inner logic within it. And I think those details are fun, not just to draw, but to think about in the first place of what details do you need to sell this area. I added a window, and I thought about it a lot, that does it even matter if there's a window or not in this bubble, because all of the walls are made out of glass. And I thought about it from my own perspective, and I thought that maybe having a window will create this illusion of normalcy, that you can kind of still feel like you're living inside a house when you have a separate circle for a window. It's not a big detail, but I think this is something that just makes sense when it's right next to the bed, so you can look outside the window when you're in the bed, even though if you just like roll on to your side, you will still see jellyfish floating in the ocean. And I added these small stickers to the walls as well, and one of them is going to have a super awesome bear illustration that is going to be hyper realistic. I'm completely joking. If you're looking at this video waiting for that to happen, that is never gonna happen. It's going to look like a children's drawing. For many of these surfaces, like the base color on the hardwood floor, I'm adding a lot of very contrasting different hues as brush strokes. Like for example this table. I am mixing them with each other all the time so that I have more interesting look to the surface, so that it's not just one flat color, because I think flat colors tend to look very dull and unfinished in paintings like this. Just the color variation within itself is going to give it a lot more visual interest to look at, and I think the floor just looks more worn out and used, and like it has seen some time when it has these different hues. And I go back and forth of adding more texture and less texture, and this all depends on what's surrounding it. How much readability do I need in that area? So if I need more readability, I will kind of tone down that texture and contrast. But if it looks like there's no other objects in there, then I can go more crazy with the textures and have something interesting on the surfaces. The perspective guides that I made for myself for this bed, this sort of like brown blocks that have a pink outline, I made those just to keep within this perspective for the bed. And that perspective is this tilted isometric perspective. So I used that specific custom guide just to make the framework of this bed. And I'm not going to use those frames for the bed at all. I'm just using them as perspective guide to have the drawing on top. And I'm not adding more guides for the bed because I think it's fine if some of the lines are kind of wonky, because it's handmade bed anyway. It's an old furniture piece. Sometimes they are a bit off, and I think that's fine. Maybe somebody with a super steady hand can criticize this and think that it should be done with more precision, but I don't care. I have very, very shaky hands, and over time I've just learned to live with it and embrace the fact that I have a very wobbly line. There's not really that much that I can do about it, and I just thought that like I can make paintings with the hand that I have, or just not paint at all, and out of those two options, just painting anyway and drawing lines that are wobbly to me seems like a more appealing idea. There's only one plant in this space. I'm not even sure if this is real, because I thought that maybe there isn't enough sunlight for a plant to survive in this space. It might be plastic, I'm afraid to say, or maybe made out of something else that is artificial. But just having a plant inside your home makes it look more cozy, so that is keeping within that idea that you need an illusion of a home for a home to feel like a safe place. That surface texture detail that I was talking about for the floor and table surfaces, that is much harder to do for these iron parts. That is the frame of the entire house, and I'm making that on a separate layer. I'm very careful of how many layers I'm using in this piece, because my maximum for this resolution is 13 layers. So that's not much considering how much different objects there is in this piece. So whenever I make a new layer, I'm trying to keep very organized on how necessary having a layer for that separate thing is. If I need to do a separate object that I can merge down, I merge down those elements immediately. For this iron frame, the texture is much more important on the surface, because the conditions it has to exist in are much more harsh than the indoors, for example, because there's sea currents and different temperature changes. So that makes that whole texture be much more worn out by time and tides. And having this frame on a separate layer helps me create different effects. Like for example, when I made the door of this airlock, I used that door as a separate texture, so I just copy pasted the door on top of the iron frame as a clipping mask, and then I used it as a luminosity layer in a very low opacity, and I just used the texture that I had painted for the door for the rest of the airlock as a kind of like base level of texture, and then I continued painting on that, because that helps me paint this amount of detail much faster than going over it all by hand, because I'm going to need to go over it so many different times. And I'm going to use this layer of the iron frame several different times during this painting process with different clipping masks. So for example, when I'm adding the light inside the airlock, I'm copying the entire layer as a screen layer, and then I'm adjusting the colors to have this sort of warm glow to it. And then I'm setting the iron frame as a clipping mask, and then I'm painting on a black layer mask on that clipping mask so that I have some light that follows the exact same texture that is underneath. Like so many different ways that you can use the same materials over and over again, but just with different hues on top, and that will just build the texture more. And in the later phases of this painting, you will see that I'm adding this sort of like green blotches on top of this frame to make it look like there's some kelp or moss growing on top of the iron frame, and that is still, again, just the same iron frame that I have copied and changed the color to green, and then I go on a layer mask and set it to black, and then with white paint I paint on top of that layer mask to bring out those green hues that follow the exact same values of the layer beneath, because it's the same layer, just with different hue. This might be cheap, but I don't care, because this painting took over 8 hours. What you are watching right now is over 10 hours of footage in different formats. 8 of it is just the painting from start to finish. So any type of time saved, I'm completely fine with, because this is a lot to go through. And I think that is the most challenging aspect about a piece like this, just having the patience. Because when I started doing the line art for this piece, I realized that, oh my god, this is going to take so much time, that am I really ready for this? And I knew that there is this like pressing need for me to post a new YouTube video at the same time, but I just felt that this painting is more important, and I felt like living in this underwater house for a few days, so I took that route. I don't know if this is the right choice or not, but I definitely enjoyed my time that I spent inside this house and outside this house, and anyway, it just felt like I lived in this space for the duration of the entire painting, and I wouldn't trade that for anything else, even if it's something that would probably help this channel a lot more. Some paintings just take time, and I think you have to ask yourself that, am I willing to trade this amount of time to find out what is at the end of this creative calling? I mean, you don't know where the idea is going to lead. You don't know if the painting is going to be good, but you just have to decide that if you're in the mood for taking on that adventure and seeing what's at the end of that road. And with this one, I definitely felt like it was time well spent. I've done a lot of top-down images, like especially when I was working on games, and I have made so many arcade games, and a lot of them are top-down perspective. And during the 10 years of doing those images, I didn't find any way to make this camera angle faster to paint. I often said to producers that this camera angle is unspeed paintable, so if you want to have a concept, you will just have to wait for it to be finished. There's no way that even a professional can make this process go faster. I'm here from the future to say that this is how it is. And I think in these sort of situations, you have to be honest about the fact that this type of an idea takes time. I think a lot of artists, me included, would rather give time estimates that are not realistic, meaning that you always want to say that, yeah, I will finish it in 1 day or 2 days, but in reality, you don't know what the creative challenges within a new piece, especially if it's a concept piece where you have to do a lot of design work that isn't just like manual labor of painting the details in, but when you actually have to design a space so that you have ideas and then you ditch them and then you come up with better ideas and then you find the right ideas that match together in a way that makes sense for the context. That design work takes time. And counting in the time to your time estimate, that you don't really see what challenges you are going to face, and so that you have some leeway to make the work enjoyable, so you're not just like rushing to meet the deadline and then turn in the finished work and feel like a complete mental wreck afterwards, because there's going to be another piece and another piece after that. Especially when working with freelance clients now, I think this is extremely important to communicate clearly that this painting is going to take time and I'm going to need enough time to make it for you, so that you are not over promising and under delivering, but you want to kind of like under promise and over deliver. And that's how you keep clients happy, and that's how you get more commissions for the same people, when you are meeting the deadlines in time, but also taking care of yourself so that you don't completely burn out in this like mad rush to try to get everything done in a non-optimal time. Honestly, that's really important. For saturation, I'm keeping everything quite low saturation, because the one main focal point of this piece is this massive orange lamp that is super saturated and bright in the middle of the room, and it's just going to illuminate everything with this warm light. This warm light is going to be surrounded by the dark blue ocean surrounding it. So that is the one unifying factor to all of these different things. So I'm trying to have enough room for that focal point to show. The way that I have decided for this piece to do that is to keep everything in the saturation department low enough to have some wiggle room to go higher with the saturation in the later phases of the piece. I'm sorry that my hair is showing in this part. By the way, I have a quarantine hair. I just shaved all of my hair off because the barbershop is closed. So that's what you're seeing here. I'm sorry, but at least I'm not wearing a cap, because that would be covering the entire camera. I'm sorry. Still learning with this YouTube stuff. Over 100 videos, I'm still haven't got it quite yet. Oh well, everything is a learning process. And I think doing new styles and new creative projects is always fun, because you get to learn new stuff. That's the thing that really clicked with me on YouTube, because I found that, oh, this is a creative format where I can be creative. And also I found endlessly inspiring the fact that I realized I am so bad at this. When I'm so bad at something that is a creative practice, it's so motivating to keep doing, because in the beginning you progress much faster. If I had done like 2,000 videos, I'm sure that it wouldn't be the same level of excitement that I feel when I'm doing a new video and I'm learning so many things at once. Like, for example, during the process of making this one, I learned so many things that I had no idea that I was messing up earlier. And during the process of this painting, I realized many things that I can do better. And some of them were just by pure chance. Like, for example, the line art of this is done on a separate layer, but like I usually do, I didn't use multiply layer for line art this time. I just made a normal layer and I used pencil brushes for those. I mean, one pencil brush. I think I used the default PROCREATE pencil brush, just because I like the line weight of that brush, and it's in everyone's PROCREATE already. I used that on a normal blend mode, and this allowed me in the end to use that line art as an added detail for the entire piece. And by this I mean that I locked the layer alpha from the layer menu, and then I went in with the same painting brush that I had earlier, and I painted all of the line art with color corresponding to the area surrounding them. And if I wanted to have them as a highlight, like for example these jellyfish that are floating around, I painted the line art much lighter than the jellyfish themselves are, so that in parts it looks like the line art itself is glowing, but in other parts I wanted to keep the line art dark like I intended to in the first place, and then I just used a local color but much darker version. And I could go through all of the areas in the painting and just have line art that matches the color in a way that makes sense for that piece. And I thought that this was such a beneficial thing for the cohesiveness of this piece, because there's so many black lines that it would just look, I think, distracting. I guess you could say that there's this decorative aspect to line art, but there's so many lines in this piece that I just wanted to tone down that whole stuff. Here's the realistic bear. If you were waiting for this bear picture to be realistic, there it is. By the way, I have flipped this whole canvas horizontally at this point, just to fix some parts that were off. Usually you don't notice what you are drawing wrong, but when you spend enough time drawing on one orientation of the canvas and then you flip it horizontally, then you immediately notice all the mistakes. Usually it has something to do with, for example, circle shapes or composition errors. Those are very easy to catch if you just like flip your canvas, and sometimes that can feel very scary, so I recommend that you do it often enough so you don't have any nasty surprises in the end when you flip the canvas and then you realize that oh no, I didn't realize that this circle shape looks like an oval. That has happened to me many times. The three main methods of blocking in a piece, they're not always set in stone. Like for example with this piece, I started with line art because I wanted to have blocked in the main elements, but then I also wanted to be sure that the color idea that I'm going for works, so I needed to block in some color. Neither of those things, the line art nor the color blocking, needs to be final. I just needed more information before I got into the more detailed line art part of this piece. So you can go back and forth however feels more natural to you, and not just your style. I think this should also have something to do with the piece that you are working on. I think sometimes people get too attached to the style that they are doing so that they feel like they have to do everything the same way every time, and this can feel very boring for your creativity, and it's just not as exciting as working on something new because you are missing that learning element and the surprise. And I remember that I was talking about this with my friend recently, and I said to him that I want to be surprised by my own painting. I want to do some planning in the beginning phases, but I never want to do so much planning that there's no surprise or adventure or discovery in the process itself. Because if I have all the answers in the beginning phase, I just feel like I'm completely useless, or my imagination isn't engaged in the process if I'm just filling in those spaces like I'm doing a coloring book. I need to be surprised, and I think that keeps my excitement for the painting throughout. And also the same reason is why I tend to leave my most fun parts to the last part of the painting, because I want there to be something to look forward to in the end. So if I get to the fun part right away, like for example painting these jellyfish, I think those are really fun to do in this piece, but I didn't want to do all of them right away because I wanted that to be kind of like sugar at the bottom of my coffee cup when I got to that part. The kelp that is surrounding this painting, I didn't draw any line art for it, but when we see these zoomed in views, you see that there is this like black line that makes it blend in better with the line art. And that is because when I blocked in the kelp surrounding this dome of glass, I just painted it with color because in that area I felt like it's more important for the color blocking to work in this piece rather than the line art to be pretty or perfect. So I just painted everything with 100% brush, and when the kelp layer was done, I copied it, and then on the lower layer I added a small Gaussian blur and I made that layer darker. And then I used the selection of the top layer to cut out the inside of that layer, so that way I could kind of fake the line art of the kelp layer, and then I just merged it with the line art because again I'm constantly running out of layers because I want to keep this as high resolution as possible because I'm making all of these details. I want to have a print out of this that I can use to see what I have done. Resolution is my priority, and therefore I have to do these kind of layer ninja moves to keep everything consistent. I would like to see a more powerful iPad in the future, but the latest one that was just released this year apparently has pretty much the same chip as my current iPad, so it's not really a power upgrade. So I think I'm going to wait for the next year before a more powerful one comes before I upgrade again. This isn't really a helpful tip, but I think it's important to say in this voiceover is that I love this star pillow next to the dog. I think the star pillow is so much fun, and it's this shape that is in many of my pieces, and I would just do anything to have this star pillow to myself. I think the star pillow looks like the star of the entire show. I even went out of my way and kind of broke my own rules and gave it a lot more saturation than the surrounding areas, and that is is not like good composition skills at all. It's just because I love the star below so much that I want everybody to see it and love it the way that I do. This is just like the dumbest thing ever, but there, I said it. And finally, we have the details for the lamp, and then I can add the glow and do some really quick color adjustments to just like bring in all those hues and make sure that everything on the outside is a little bit colder and everything in the inside is a little bit warmer. And I do that with these almost gray overlay layers that are just slightly changing the hue on the surfaces to warmer and colder direction. And after adding these two adjustment layers, I add the glows, and then I'm going to call this piece finished. And I'm glad that I made the whole thing from start to finish, because this is just one of those pieces where you need to work for hours and hours before it starts looking like anything, and you just have to have faith in the idea that it will lead to somewhere. And sometimes that can take a really long time, but once you have kind of walked through this like unknown area of the painting phase, and sometimes it can come after days of painting, then it's just so much more rewarding because you think that you're not going to find anything interesting, and when it's there you feel like very grateful to the idea that came to you, that you didn't believe in it but you kind of like blindly followed it. And then there's this reward of not just another place but kind of like another world. And that's the painting. I hope you take part in my Art is my real home challenge. I'm gonna leave a link to that below, and have fun painting. It can be an interesting way to not just to escape your home, but to go to another world. And I think these trips are the most interesting ones, and ones that I definitely feel like are worth taking. I'll see you in the next video. Bye!